If this show has one core theme, other than me talking about video games I like, it's change. This is a celebration of the natural process of life that is change. It may feel like someone putting in so much effort to document their favorite games would be doing so to give it a sense of weight and permanence to their opinions, almost as if this is like a modern day equivalent of me chiseling my top 10 into the side of the rock for all future generations to admire and appreciate. But that couldn't be further from the truth. This show exists primarily so that a 40-year-old me in the future can look back on it, reconnect with how his younger self thought, and hopefully laugh at how little I know now as a 20-year-old relative to how much more I will have learned in the future. I'd like to think that's what will happen at least. I've never shied away from how my relationship with games has evolved over time, from how my childhood was more or less dominated by Spider-Man, Mario, and Star Wars, to how despite loving longer experiences now, I lament how infrequently I'm able to have them in my young adulthood. I wish I did a series like this when I was like 14 to 16, because I would love to have a concrete frame of reference for what childhood me believed to be true. I imagine for this intro portion of the video, I'm playing clips of games from the top 366 that were super relevant to my childhood. Some still hold a very dear place in my heart, others live on simply as a beloved memory. I've never quite settled on how I feel about carrying childhood favorites into adulthood. Even with my extremely limited experience in the game industry, I've already run into countless scenarios of people talking about how gaming sucks now and how the golden age of gaming is from when they were a child, leaving me with the daring task of having to quickly study their face in a split second to try and gauge their age so I can know what era of gaming they're even talking about. These kinds of conversations never go well for me. The thought of being locked into what I liked when I was at my most impressionable sounds horrible to me. I refuse to believe I've already played all of the games that will become favorites. Yet at the same time, I think it's frankly unnatural to just cast away all of what you loved as a kid. Such a complete upending of one's taste just strikes me as manufactured, a desperate attempt to embrace maturity even at the expense of oneself. Maybe that sounds a bit extreme. Some people do just have a revolving door of interests rather than holding on to any of them long term. But I think what this whole conversation boils down to, at least as it relates to this show, is this. I think everyone should have at least one game from their childhood in their top 10 favorites. I wouldn't necessarily want the majority of games on the list to come from when I was a kid, but it would also feel rather lifeless if none were present. Why is having one childhood game out of 10 favorites the perfect number? Because that's how many I happen to have. This is the game from my youth that I plan to hold on to forever. Donkey Kong Country is my gaming weighted blanket, my warm shower, my hot chocolate in winter. I guess the concept of comfort for me goes hand in hand with the concept of getting warm. If the original Donkey Kong Country had showed up earlier in the series, I likely would have talked more about the history of this game, how its visuals were revolutionary, how it saved Nintendo when they had lost a majority market share to Sega and Sonic. His original arcade game is one of the most important video games ever made, but when you think of Donkey Kong, he's wearing a tie. When you think of Donkey Kong characters, you think of Diddy. What does Donkey Kong like? Bananas! None of that was present in his original arcade games. His modern identity, where he is in the running for the second biggest Nintendo icon, owes most of its existence to Donkey Kong Country. I had to at least acknowledge those points, because Donkey Kong Country is certainly one of Nintendo's most important games ever for those reasons. But believe me when I say, those factors could not be more irrelevant to why DKC is number 9 on this list. It'd be right here even if this game was a financial and critical failure. To speak to the childhood factor of it a little bit, the Super Nintendo was my first console, and nothing compared to the engrossing immersion of Donkey Kong Country. DKC 2 and 3 probably have more varied and detailed environments overall, but I think the first game's world is a bit more homogenized overall. This means that the sequel's levels may be more captivating as standalone levels, but the entire game of DKC 1 feels more immersive as a package. I think this is largely because environments don't get too crazy. It's trees and caves and lakes with various weather and daytime elements. This simplicity makes little changes feel so significant, like how level 2 already places you at nighttime, how the sun will set as levels go on, how weather will kick up, or how intentionally off-putting it feels when you finally begin to encounter some more cold, industrial environments. And the 2D rendering of 3D models speaks for itself. Hand-drawn sprites were never going to be able to compete with this technology in terms of presenting a believable-looking world on the Super Nintendo. And as a result of how bespoke this technique was and how crudely it was implemented at times, the Donkey Kong Country trilogy has a style to them that I truly think is impossible to replicate in the modern day. These games will remain in the public consciousness for that reason alone. They just can't be replaced on an atmospheric and presentation level. That's a big factor in what captivated me as a child, but obviously my appreciation has only grown into adulthood for it to have gotten this high. Sticking with the presentation for a minute, I think it's time to give proper kudos to David Wise for his work on the entire series. Literally, all of his Donkey Kong soundtracks are beloved, but this game definitely remains the one I listen to the most in my free time. That is certainly nostalgia-inspired on some level, but what makes the music of these games so legendary was already present here in the original outing. Everyone knows Jungle Hijinks. It's one of gaming's most legendary tracks, but I think most DKC players will agree that the strength of these soundtracks is not in their ability to consistently push out catchy earworms. That's a component of it. But in reality, it's in the tightrope-like balance this soundtrack walks. Environmental immersion is more important to DKC than most platformers, and the music complements that. When you enter a mine shaft and Life in the Mine starts playing, distant sounds and percussion feel echoey, yet the track feels largely empty. No one element is bearing down on the other or commands attention until the soft flute comes in and smacks you with a melody that somehow perfectly fits with the rhythm of the song that you thought had just existed to provide ambience for the environment. I don't actually know if that's a flute or not. Please don't laugh at me. This is the secret sauce of these soundtracks, prioritizing the player's ability to buy into the environment while still providing riffs, rhythms, and melodies that can get stuck in your head just as well. No game pulls that off quite like the original DKC does. Not to mention the great, meaty, in-your-face sound effects that pair with it. Those factors do contribute to why I still like the game so much, but there is honestly one key quality that if the game lacked, I wouldn't return to it nearly as much as I do, and that is simply how breezy of a game it is to play. Wanting to indulge in childhood memories would become a bit unreasonable if I was doing it with a 30-hour adventure game. Donkey Kong Country? I can knock it out in like an hour. And it's not just the game's length that allows for this, it's the momentum the game carries throughout. Momentum has always been essential to the series. Your main attack gives you a speed boost. You and your enemies are larger than average, so jumping on their head doesn't require as much precision that would slow you down. You can even roll off a cliff into a jump, giving you a solution in just about every situation to keep moving forward. Compare this to other games of the time, like Sonic, where going fast can only be part of the experience if slowing down is as well, or Mario, where landing on enemies is a more precise endeavor, or Kirby, where his best form of transportation is his slowest. Even compare it to the other two Donkey Kong Country games, where their greater emphasis on collectibles and puzzles require you to slow down or use your brain more. And when my main goal is uncomplicated comfort that I associate with a simpler time, using my brain is just not a priority. Donkey Kong Country remains potentially my most replayed video game ever, because it feels good in this context to constantly be moving forward. Diddy moves fast, Donkey can roll through anything, hitboxes are generous, and so many elements, from animal buddies to barrel cannons to minecarts, only make the game move faster. I think by now I've painted the complete picture. Donkey Kong Country is a game I can turn on in moments when I want to dial life back a bit. I can appreciate how this game made me feel as a child while still appreciating its approach to gameplay as an adult. I can play through the whole thing without feeling guilty about starting up any big commitment that will prevent me from being productive, which is amplified by a game where progression feels constant without demanding I give the game more thought than I wanted to give it. Donkey Kong Country is the perfect escape. The game I play when I need instant joy. The game I play when I want to remember my past. And honestly, It's the game I play when I want to guarantee myself fun. That's a pretty amazing title for a game to hold for a person.